The elevator was still descending when Rafael Montero had already decided that woman's fate. It was 7:40 in the morning. The lobby of the Montero Capital headquarters building gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that only exists when someone wakes up before the sun to make sure others don't notice the effort. The marble reflected the lights like a mirror, and at the center of that reflection was a woman on her knees, scrubbing a stain that refused to come out. Selena Farias was 32 years old, but carried the exhaustion of someone who had lived twice as long. Hair tied back with a worn elastic band, blue uniform with the cleaning company's name embroidered on the chest, and beside her, sitting on the floor with his back against a granite column, was Theo, 5 years old, big, dark eyes, full of everything childhood had not yet taken away. Selena had tried to leave him with a neighbor, but Dona Perpetua had been running a fever since Friday, and the daycare would only open after 8. Selena's shift started at 6. There was no other option. Theo came along, with his dinosaur backpack on his shoulders and a cookie in his hand, sitting quietly just as she had asked. Quiet as a 5-year-old can be when he understands, in some mysterious way, that his mother cannot handle anything more than what she is already dealing with. He looked at the ceiling, at the lights, at the men in suits who passed by, without looking down. Rafael Montero stepped out of the elevator at 7:42. President of the group, owner of the building, of 3 investment funds, and of a reputation built on the belief that efficiency does not go hand in hand with excuses. He saw the child even before he saw the woman. He stopped, looked at the assistant walking 2 steps behind him. What is this? The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular. It was the kind of question that serves as a warning. Selena lifted her eyes from the floor and felt her stomach drop. She knew that expression. She had learned to recognize it in less than 3 weeks on the job. The closed face, the clenched jaw, the look that didn't see people, it saw problems. "Good morning, sir," she said, getting up quickly, as if speed could fix something. "That boy cannot be here." Raphael's voice was low, controlled, and therefore even sharper. "This is a company, not a daycare. If you cannot organize your personal life so it doesn't interfere with the work environment, I need to reassess whether this contract with your company has a future." Selena opened her mouth, closed it. There are words we rehearse, so we never have to use them, and there are moments when they disappear before even reaching the tongue. Theo, however, didn't have that problem. The boy stood up slowly, put the cookie in his pocket with a seriousness that didn't match his age, took 3 steps toward Rafael Montero, that tall man, in a dark suit, who looked at his mother as if she were an administrative error, and said, with a firm voice and no tremor, "Why are you being mean to my mom?" The lobby stopped, not in a dramatic way, not with anyone dropping what they were doing in slow motion. It stopped the way things really stop, in internal silence, when a question hits a place we thought was well protected. Rafael Montero looked at the boy. Theo didn't look away. "She didn't do anything wrong," Theo continued, as if he were explaining something very obvious to someone who was slow to understand. "She works a lot. Every day she wakes up early and stays on her knees to keep everything clean. You don't even look at the floor. But she does. She always does." Selena wasn't breathing. Rafael Montero wasn't either. After a silence that lasted far too long to be comfortable, the president of Montero Capital looked away from the boy. He said nothing more, walked toward the executive wing with the assistant trying to keep up, but more slowly than when they had arrived. Something had changed. No one there knew how to name what, but everyone felt it. And Theo went back to his dinosaur backpack, took the cookie out of his pocket, and kept eating as if the world still made sense, because to him, it did. What no one knew yet was that Rafael Montero would not be able to forget that question anytime soon. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and tell in the comments what you think, and which city or country you're watching from. Rafael Montero spent the entire morning in meetings he himself had scheduled and in which he couldn't truly participate. He was present in body, signing documents, answering questions, approving projections, but his mind stayed in the lobby. On that question, on the voice of the boy who didn't tremble even a little when asking it. Why are you being mean to my mom? He was 51 years old. He had built an empire from a company inherited from his father, tripled its assets in less than a decade, faced crises, lawsuits, and dishonest partners. None of those situations had made him stand still in front of his office window, staring into nothing, trying to remember the last time someone had been that honest with him. Direct, without an agenda, without wanting anything in return. At 11 in the morning, his administrative director, Claudio Ferraz, knocked on the door. Claudio was 54 years old, hair parted with surgical precision and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. He had been with the company for almost 12 years and had survived 3 restructurings because he knew exactly what Rafael wanted to hear and never delivered anything beyond that. I've already taken care of the problem from earlier, Claudio said, sitting down without being invited. I spoke with the supervisor of the outsourced company. The employee will receive a formal warning. If it happens again, the contract will be terminated. Rafael slowly turned his chair. What problem? Claudio blinked. The cleaning lady. The child in the lobby. You yourself mentioned it was unacceptable. I didn't ask you to do anything. No, but... Cancel the warning. There was a pause. The kind of pause Claudio was not used to facing, because in 12 years he had learned that anticipating the boss's wishes was his greatest protection. Being wrong in that calculation was unfamiliar territory. Rafael, company policy is clear regarding. I know what the policy is. I wrote the policy. Rafael turned back to the window. Cancel it, and bring me that employee's file by the end of the day. Claudio left without responding, but there was something on his face, a small, almost invisible contraction at the corner of his mouth, that Rafael didn't see, or perhaps didn't want to see. The file arrived at 3 in the afternoon, brought by a young assistant who left the folder on the desk and quickly walked out, as if she sensed she was in the middle of something she didn't understand. Selena Farias, 32 years old, hired 23 days ago by the outsourced company that had been providing services to the group for 4 years. Performance evaluation, exemplary. No prior incidents. A daughter of separated parents, according to the emergency contact form, where the only name listed was her own. Rafael stared at that detail longer than he should have. Single mother. Shift from 6 to 2. Salary he could calculate in less than 10 seconds. And which represented such a small fraction of what his company generated per hour that the number unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. He wasn't naive. He knew inequality existed. But knowing and feeling are different things, and the difference between the two is, almost always, a 5-year-old child looking at you without blinking. In the days that followed, Rafael began to notice things that had always been there. The cleaning staff arrived before any other employee and left after almost everyone. They worked in silence, in the corners, as if invisibility were part of the uniform. No one knew their names. No one asked. Claudio Ferraz, in turn, observed all of this with a different kind of attention. In 12 years, he had built a network of influence based on a simple principle: keep the layers separate. Entry-level employees had no access to decisions, and decisions did not reach the base. It was a system that worked because no one questioned it. Any unexpected attention coming from the top down was a problem that needed to be contained. He didn't yet know why Rafael had asked for that file, but he knew he needed to find out, and that, if necessary, he needed to act before the situation slipped out of the control he had spent years building. That same week, Selena began to notice that something had changed. The cleaning supplies were restocked without her having to ask. The staff bathroom, whose lock had been broken for 2 months, appeared fixed without notice. Small things. But Selena had learned to pay attention to what others ignore. It was that habit that made the marble shine every day before 7. And it was that same habit that made her silently ask exactly what had changed in that man after Theo opened his mouth. Rafael Montero was not the kind of man who made decisions on impulse. Every move he had made in his professional life had first gone through a cold analysis, through numbers, through projections. He did not buy companies based on intuition. He did not fire out of anger. He did not hire out of sympathy. That is precisely why what he did the following Monday surprised even him. He arrived earlier than usual, 6:40 in the morning, 40 minutes before his regular time. The lobby was still being prepared, and there was Selena, her back to the entrance, mopping the farthest corner of the corridor, with Theo sitting on a bench near the reception desk, drawing something in a small notebook. Raphael stood still for a moment before being noticed. There was something unsettling about that scene, not in a negative way, but the kind that forces you to look more closely than you intended. The woman worked with a level of focus he rarely saw in people who earned 10 times more. And the child simply existed in that space as if he knew exactly where he belonged and was completely comfortable with it. Selena saw him when she turned to rinse the mop. She swallowed hard, but she did not lower her eyes. Raphael walked to the reception desk, picked up a glass of water that no one had offered him, and said, without looking directly at her, "What is his name?" A short pause. "Theo," Selena replied. Raphael nodded slightly, said nothing more, walked toward the elevator. But Theo lifted his eyes from the notebook and followed him with his gaze until the doors closed, with the same seriousness as always, as if he were evaluating whether the previous verdict still applied. In the days that followed, Raphael made 3 decisions that Claudio Ferraz did not manage to anticipate. The first was to request an internal audit of the working conditions of the outsourced teams, not as an investigation, as a review. The difference was subtle on paper, but brutal in practice. A review did not require a cause, did not trigger a formal process, and could be conducted quietly, without anyone knowing exactly what was being evaluated. The second was to cancel the contract with the facilities company that supplied the cleaning equipment that, according to a report no one had read, had been outdated for 3 years, and to open a bidding process for a new supplier, with specifications that included ergonomics and worker safety as mandatory criteria. The third decision was the quietest of all, and therefore the most dangerous for Claudio. Raphael asked the HR department to map all outsourced employees who had been working in the headquarters building for more than 2 years without any additional benefits. The response came in a spreadsheet with 43 names. Selena Farias was not among them. She had only been there for 23 days. But the exercise revealed a pattern Raphael had not noticed before: extremely high turnover, salaries that had not been adjusted in 18 months, and zero health insurance for a team that handled chemical products every day. Claudio learned about all of this through a channel that was not official. He had someone inside HR who informed him about sensitive movements, a partnership built over the years, with small accumulated favors, the kind that never leave a trace in email. When the name Selena Farias appeared twice in less than a week in internal records, first in the request for her file, then as a reference in the audit, Claudio understood that he needed to act with more urgency than he had calculated. He summoned the supervisor of the outsourced company for a meeting that was not on the official schedule. "The employee is generating attention that is not convenient," Claudio said, with the objectivity of someone who had learned to disguise intentions in corporate language. "I'm not asking for anything explicit. I'm saying that maybe it is time to reorganize the teams, redistribute shifts, review allocations." The supervisor understood. It was that kind of understanding that Claudio had cultivated for years. What Claudio had not calculated was that Selena, that same week, had done something that would completely change the dynamics of what was to come. She had started to take notes. Dates, times, names, conversations overheard in the corridors while she scrubbed the floor that others walked on without looking. Not out of strategy. She had no experience with that kind of game. She did it because she was organized, because she had always been like that, because Theo had inherited that trait from her, and she knew that habits of care protect more than any plan. But those notes were exactly what would make the difference when the moment came, and it was closer than anyone imagined. The meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning on a Thursday that seemed like any other, but it wasn't. Claudio Ferraz had spent the last 4 days building the argument with the care of an architect who knows the ground is unstable. He had documents. He had history. He had the outsourced supervisor willing to sign any team redistribution that was requested. What he didn't have, and underestimated irreversibly, was the awareness that Rafael Montero had arrived ahead of him in almost everything. The meeting was a budget review, routine on paper. But the day before, Rafael had asked Claudio to prepare a presentation consolidating all outsourcing contracts from the last 3 years. A request that sounded like any other request, until Claudio began assembling the numbers and realized there was a gap that didn't close. 18 months without salary adjustments for outsourced teams. That was documented. What was also documented, in invoices that Claudio had personally approved, was that the contract with the facilities company had been renewed with an 11% increase in the same period. The difference had not gone to the workers, and it had gone somewhere. Rafael had known this since Tuesday. The silent audit he had requested was not a review. It was a trap. Not in a cruel sense, but in a precise one. A space created so that the truth would reveal itself on its own, without anyone needing to force it. At 8:50 in the morning, while Claudio was organizing slides in the meeting room on the 12th floor, Rafael was 3 floors below, in a small room used to store old files. With him were 2 names, the head of HR and a labor lawyer who had worked with the company for 6 years, but who that morning had been hired for 2 hours, in her own name, not the group's. And there was Selena Farias. She had arrived at 6, as always. At 8:15, Rafael's assistant had gone down to the lobby and said, in a low voice, that the CEO would like a conversation before the shift, if she could. It wasn't an order. It was a question. Selena had said yes before even thinking. In the small room, she placed on the table a spiral notebook with a blue cover. 46 handwritten pages, with dates, times, and names. The lawyer flipped through it in silence for almost 3 minutes, then looked at Rafael. "This is enough," said the lawyer. "More than enough." Selena didn't understand everything that followed. There were terms she didn't know, references to contractual clauses, to joint liability, to misappropriation of funds in a service contract. What she understood was enough. The things she had written down with no strategy at all, purely out of the habit of someone who pays attention to what others ignore, had legal weight, had a name, had consequences. At 9:20 in the morning, when Claudio Ferraz was halfway through the second page of his presentation, Rafael interrupted him. Not with anger, not with a raised voice, with a folder. "I need you to explain the difference between what's in this folder and what you presented to me as personnel costs over the last 18 months. Claudio opened the folder, closed it, opened it again, as if the numbers would change on the second reading. This was taken out of context, he said, with the controlled voice of someone who had spent years training for situations exactly like this. "It wasn't," said the lawyer, entering through the door that had been left slightly open. What happened over the next 40 minutes was silent and devastating in the way only administrative proceedings can be. There were no shouts, no scene. There were documents, dates, signatures, and a man who had built 12 years of influence on the premise that no one would ever look closely enough, discovering that someone had. A woman on her knees on the marble floor, with a worn elastic in her hair, who wrote down what she saw because she was organized, because she had always been that way. Claudio was placed on preventive leave at 10:48 in the morning. The outsourced supervisor received notice of contract termination for cause before lunch. And Selena Farias was back in the lobby at 11 o'clock, mop in hand, when Raphael came down the elevator for the second time that day. He stopped in the middle of the lobby. She stopped working. "Thank you," he said. "Just that." Selena nodded. There was something she wanted to say, but she couldn't find the right words. And so she remained silent, which is sometimes the most honest answer there is. Theo, sitting on the bench with his notebook, looked up. He looked at Raphael. He looked at his mother, and went back to drawing, as if the final verdict had just been recorded somewhere only he had access to. The changes did not arrive all at once. They arrived the way real things do, gradually, without announcement, without ceremony. In the week following Claudio Ferraz's suspension, Raphael called a meeting that was not on the corporate calendar, and, for that very reason, no one knew exactly how to interpret it. It was not for directors. It was not for managers. It was for the 43 people listed in the spreadsheet HR had put together, the outsourced workers with more than 2 years in the company, invisible on paper, essential in practice. Selena heard about the meeting from a colleague who had received the notice. She stared at the paper for a long time before folding it and putting it in the pocket of her apron. The room was too large for the number of people, and precisely because of that, there was something deliberate about it. Raphael had chosen a room that accommodated executives, not to diminish those who were arriving, but to make it clear that the space was theirs too, that it always had been. He spoke for a short time. There was no prepared speech, and that was evident. And it was exactly what made people truly pay attention. He said that he had been wrong, that there was a structure within the company that benefited from the invisibility of those who worked closest to the ground, and that this structure had existed with his permission, even if indirectly. That it would change, not because it was strategic, because it was the minimum. None of the 43 people applauded. Some looked at the floor. Others looked at him with the caution of those who had heard promises before and had learned not to waste energy on what had not yet happened. Selena looked at the window. In the months that followed, the contracts were revised. Salaries were adjusted with retroactive pay. A basic health plan was extended to all outsourced workers who provided fixed services in the headquarters building. It was not fast. It was not without resistance. There were directors who argued against it, legally, financially, with all the language money uses when it does not want to move. But Raphael had made a decision, and decisions made by people who have already understood the cost of not making them are difficult to reverse. Selena's notebook became a central piece in the labor case that followed against Claudio and against the outsourced supervisor. The lawyer had said it was enough, and it was. 46 handwritten pages resulted in compensation for 31 workers who had been dismissed over the last 18 months without the proper payments. Selena gained nothing beyond what she was owed. But there was something that was not in any document, and that weighed more than any number. The feeling that what she had done mattered. That paying attention had been worth it. Theo turned 6 on a Saturday afternoon with a chocolate cake and 4 children from his new school. A school that Selena was able to afford after her salary was corrected. He received a new notebook as a gift, with a green cover bigger than the previous one. He opened it, smelled the pages with his characteristic seriousness, and said he would save it for when he had something important to record. Selena laughed. It was a laugh that came from the right place, from deep inside, the kind that appears when you're so used to holding back that you forget what it feels like when you don't have to. Rafael Montero did not become a different person overnight. He remained direct, remained demanding, remained the kind of person who prefers numbers to conversations. But something had shifted within him, not in a dramatic way, not in a way he could precisely name. It was more like a recalibrated scale, a standard that had moved position without asking permission. Months later, on a mild morning, he went down to the lobby before his usual time and found the cleaning staff working. He stopped, looked at the marble reflecting the lights, looked at the people who made that happen every day before any other employee arrived. He said good morning. He used their names. It was not a grand gesture, but it was real. And sometimes what changes a culture is not a decree, but a small gesture repeated until it becomes the norm. Selena was not there that day. It was her day off. But the colleague who was there told her afterward, with a smile that needed no explanation. There are things a 5-year-old child sees with a clarity that adults lose when they learn to be strategic. Theo had not taught Rafael Montero anything. He had simply asked an honest question at a moment when honesty was the rarest thing in that lobby. Why are you being mean to my mom? The real answer, Rafael only found months later, not in words, but in action. And perhaps that is the only form of answer that truly counts. Not what we say we will do, but what we do when no one is watching, when there is no applause, when it is just the decision and the conscience in the same room. The world does not change all at once. It changes the way marble gets cleaned, every day, early, by hands most people do not see, but that are always there. If you made it this far in the story, leave in the comments what you felt, and which city or country you're watching from. If it touched you in some way, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Each of these actions helps this story reach more people.